I'm Francois Tanguay, so as some of you may know, I'm the CEO and founder of Inventive, but also the Uno platform. I have two questions I keep asking Jerome and team, so that's probably my primary job right now, is can we build it, and why not? I want to start by thanking the whole Inventive crew. They've pulled this, that's our first conference, right? So obviously it's been a tremendous amount of work. Most of it has been working so far. So we really appreciate it. So a big thanks to the Inventive team. I'd also like to thank all the sponsors that we have today that are believing in what we're doing. They've been providing tremendous support. Some of them even showed up here today from far, far away. So we really appreciate them being part of that story. I want to thank all of you that have traveled. Actually, some of you traveled from across the globe, literally, to be here today. It's almost unbelievable for us. We started that story years ago, and being able to be here today and standing in front of you is an honor. I want to thank all of you that are also streaming from across the globe today. Sasha was showing numbers. It's pretty exciting. And we truly appreciate you being here today. Miguel was on stage and was like coming up with all the timeline as to what he's been up to for the last couple of decades. And that's really why we're here today, right? So I want to especially thank Miguel, but the whole team at Xamarin and Microsoft that have poured countless hours and sweat into coming up with what used to be Mono and Xamarin, and that really, really fueled the growth and the adoption that we're seeing today. And none of this, and you wouldn't be having coffee and great breakfast this morning if it wasn't for them, in a sense. So thanks to the Microsoft team. Many of you may know what the story behind Uno is, and I'll keep it short. We started this in 2013 when I asked Jerome, could we build this, and probably asked why not a few times. And we started it as our own internal tools for Inventive, right? As a software agency, we kept building on top of it to build apps. We had previous tremendous growth on the Windows side of things, and obviously customers were pushing and asking for apps on all platforms. So that's why we started building it really as an internal set of tools for us to build apps on iOS and Android internally for our customers. And came that moment in 2018 at Build when we said, like, this is too good to be true. We need to open source it and make it available to everybody and see if we're crazy or if we can get some external validation, right? Which we did. So we announced the open sourcing of Uno at Build. We scrambled with a quick stage and booth, and at the same time, as you saw in the timeline, WebAssembly was coming up, and they were starting to do work on it. So we scrambled a quick demo also and announced a WebAssembly preview in 2019. Comes Build this year in 2019. We announced that we'd be offering also paid support from Inventive standpoint for us to be able to support our enterprise customer with like offering more hands-on support for those adopting Uno on a daily basis. And we're here today announcing our first, and doing our first UnoConf, and obviously, like, you'll see more announcements about it later, and what's coming up in terms of roadmap and all that, and that's what we're here to share today. What's important to us is we're on a daily basis keeping metrics and looking an eye of whether or not we're getting the validation we need about the product. And we've seen tremendous growth. Most KPIs that we're following, we've doubled or tripled just like since last Build 19. And we're getting contributions by the day to the platform. And that's really exciting because that's why we open source a product in the first place, right? And that's thanks to all the contributors we have actively working the platform. So it's not just the team, the Uno team working on this, but it's all you contributors that are contributing. And many of you are here today. And I want to thank you personally for all the work that you've been doing. And Joffrey would mention to you, he's one of our dev relationship guy now who just joined officially. It mentioned that it's not just about code, right? You can improve documentation that we're keeping and building by the day. You can contribute. Many of you have had public engagements already. Speaking engagements, you're organizing conferences. I would probably argue that if you were to play the Uno card game, take a picture of it, submit a PR, you would probably accept it as well, right? We've announced this week our first partnership with the Bravant consulting company in Spain, through their innovation lab, idea work, they're going to start building apps on top of Uno. They're starting to contribute to the platform and also organize like community events out of Spain. So we're really happy to get them on board. So this is really exciting, and obviously we're looking up for more partnerships as well. We got some. We're measuring also in terms of reach, and that's for you, like actively participating on social media also. But like we're getting amazing coverage of what we're doing, and that's the validation we need to keep going forward, right? We got covered by InfoWorld. I would argue that probably our best coverage was Tim Ewer as a call out, wearing his Uno t-shirt at the Build conference during his talk. It probably generated the most buzz we've ever had. At Inventive, we've been building hundreds of apps on top of Uno, but it's also like getting our customers working with this platform and trusting enough, or trusting what we're doing with the Uno platform to build mission-critical apps for vet hospitals and the pet care industry, for flight booking and airlines. We have apps for loyalty that are consumer-facing apps for you to do mobile ordering of your popcorn on movie night, for you to renew your prescriptions at the drugstore, or to order a rideshare. So it's really amazing to see all those experiences being built. And it really challenges on a daily basis, like how solid is our platform, how much we can push it to create like unique and differentiating experiences. So really thank you to our customers. Speaking of which, I'd like to introduce you to two of our customers that are actively building some apps on top of Uno, and let them explain to you why they chose Uno in the first place, what their company is all about, and what have been their challenges. So Abraham from Angkor should be here, so I'd be welcome to join.
I started working at Chorus about a year ago with a background in developing warehouse management apps in Xamarin Forms. So for those of you who have developed Xamarin Forms, you would know that one question that keeps on coming up time and time again is, can this be done using Xamarin? For those all of you know, when it comes to extending functionality past the initial set of APIs that Xamarin exposes, things get kind of complicated. You have to create workarounds for each platform, or custom renderers or events for each platform. And many times the UI team had to work around the Xamarin Forms limitations, just we should be able to develop to give that UI that they want. So Chorus, where I am now, they develop they use Uno to develop cross-platform apps for autism care. So these apps require complex UIs and data visualizations to help care providers provide the very best care for children with autism. Is using other cross-platform technologies, we would have come up with the question many times, can this be done? Can these controls be implemented? Can we do it? How hard is it going to be? Uno, however, the question changes from can it be done to how is it done? Because using Uno, we know everything can be done. With the full power of UWP behind Uno, we can create rich and complex controls for cross-platform, including iOS and Android and WebAssembly. So we at Chorus and all the thousands of children with autism that will benefit from these apps want to say thank you for Francois and Jerome for brainstorming this Uno idea and allowing this to happen. And thank you for the amazing Uno team for their amazing, constant support and collaboration that helps us do this every day and is going to help us bring this app to help children with autism. Thank you.
Thank you, Abraham. Next, I'd like to invite Scott from Hubsy. They faced different challenges in a more brownfield scenario, and I'll be able to explain to you what it is all about. Thank you, Scott.
My name's Scott Way. I work for Hub Software Engineering, and we develop and sell software as a service into the maritime transport industry. Now, we started about 9 years ago, and we chose C# and XAML as the technologies or the languages to write software for our clients. And we chose those languages because we wanted a fast development, and we wanted a nice-looking UI at the end of it. Now, 9 years ago, and we also wanted to deliver over the web. So 9 years ago, if you wanted that, your choice was Silverlight. So that's what we did, and now we've got basically two challenges. One is fairly obvious. We have to remove Silverlight. We have about 2 years to do that. And the second one, and probably more importantly, is we want to end up with a development platform or a development stack which is as good and in terms of speed and the final product as what we've got now. So if we look at the first one, how do we get rid of Silverlight? Well, we've got basically, we can look at a few options. So one of those could be, we can go to a JavaScript framework like Angular, and we can go to HTML. If we look at the cost of that for us, our application is probably a medium size. We've got about 250 XAML files and about 1,500 C# files on the client. Now, these are very rough figures because this is all kind of, it's very difficult to estimate how much time it would take to convert this. But let's say if we wanted to convert all our XAML files to HTML, and let's put 5 days on that for each one. And let's say we have to convert all our C# to TypeScript, which is not too far away from C#, and let's put 2 days on that. If we were to go to something like Angular with Kendo UI, so right now we're using Telerik Silverlight controls, and we rely heavily on the rich functionality that we get from that. So we'd also have to, that's also a fair chunk of work. We'd have to move from some XAML controls into some Kendo UI controls. That comes out to somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 man days. That's quite a lot of work. So we could look at another option. We could look at Blazor, for example, which has been talked about. Blazor lets us run C# in the browser. That's great. So we can optimistically put that. Let's put that down to 0. Let's say all our C# files just run out the box. But we've still got, with Blazor, we would still have a XAML to HTML conversion to do. So with Blazor, we could probably get our time down to maybe 1,200 days, something like that, or 1,000, 1,500 days. And thirdly, of course, we could go to Uno. And obviously with Uno, we get all our C# in the browser, plus we get our XAML more or less as it is in the browser. We need to do some work. Silverlight XAML is not the same as UWP XAML. So we can maybe put a couple of days there, and we end up with around about, for the Uno conversion, probably around 500, 700 days. And so, depending on which of the options we're looking at, we've got savings of between 3,000 or 3,500 days if we go to Uno. So that's fairly, that's quite a lot of money for us. Now, the second challenge, which I mentioned, was to end up with a development stack that's as fast and as agile to develop in as what we've got now. And obviously, with the Uno, we've got the UWP and the C#. We're not that far away from it already. So it's not a no-brainer, but for us to go to Uno it's not that far away. Now, where we are with this, we've got this application, and what we've done, we've taken a vertical slice through it, and once this slice is, it's basically lets clients of our clients come in and run reports, and part of that application puts up a screen where it dynamically loads a list of the parameters that a report requires. So if you're familiar with XAML, you can do this with an items control, a data template selector, and some data templates, and in that way you can show date pickers or combo boxes, cascading combo boxes, depending on what the parameters of the report are. And one of the good things that we've been able to achieve with Uno is because Uno supports Net Standard 2, and we use an ORM that uses Net Standard 2, we can retrieve our clients, our entities out of the database, have them render in Uno in the browser for basically zero work. The exact same project that we run on the server to retrieve our entities runs as is in the browser. So that's even better than Silverlight, because if anybody is familiar with Silverlight, you would have to use RIA services for that kind of thing. So yeah, we're very pleased.
So now I'll leave you with Jerome. Jerome is our CTO, and he'll really be able to first show you code instead of just slides, and really explain what Uno is doing in details for those of you that haven't had a chance to explore it in more details, why you should care, why we believe it has tremendous potential moving forward, and where is the market moving, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty, and then I'll come back for the more roadmap and where we're going next. Thanks, Jerome.
Thank you, Francois. I'm just going to plug in my laptop so I don't forget about that. Going to be demos that we were in. So I'm going to be talking to you about the whole vision and the reason why we're doing all this. And Miguel explained the future of .NET and the direction where that is going. And the very important part for us is being able to run .NET code everywhere, and especially the UI. And the very important part for us is to be able to take that code that Microsoft has been building with WinUI and the upcoming plans that they're going to publish at some point. They said at Build that we're open source WinUI. And the very important part for us is to make sure that everything runs on desktop, mobile, and web. And we're not competing with Microsoft. We're not competing. It's about integrating and resting on top of Microsoft and using all the code source that they've been building and the tooling that is available. So that means that following Uno and using the tooling that goes along with it is about basically following Microsoft and advancement in C# and Visual Studio and what WinUI is going to be providing in the future. So that's a very important part about all the whole .NET ecosystem. And what makes us tick really in terms of going forward is the web, really. It's something that we've been looking at for a while, and Scott just mentioned that it's all about getting access to the deployment model and just having something that just runs off of the web really quickly. And .NET Everywhere is really the dream of making an application that runs really quickly on all places. So Miguel just touched about WebAssembly very quickly into details, but I'm going to be just talking about some pieces of that. So it's a bytecode for the web. It's available on all recent browsers, which also spans to mobile. It's a compilation target for all browsers, for all languages, and that includes there's probably a new language every day, pretty much. So that means that eventually anything that can run on WebAssembly will run on WebAssembly if it can be compiled down to WebAssembly. So that's very, very encouraging for us to see that everything's going there. And that means that if you have a piece of software that's been running for a while, that's developed in some exotic language or maybe an old language, maybe you're doing COBOL or something like that, you'll be able to reuse it at some point because it will be compiled down to WebAssembly. And it's backed by very large players in the community. Microsoft, Google, Apple, the Firefox, and all the Mozilla work that they've been doing, and also because of the fact that it's running outside of the browser. Solomon Hykes from Docker said that if WebAssembly would have happened before Docker started, then it would be a very different environment right now because of the promise of running everywhere. And if you've been doing some Docker, you know that using different CPU architectures can be difficult. If your Docker you want to run on your ARM device or your Raspberry Pi doesn't exist, then you have to rebuild all that. And if you were using WebAssembly, then there would be no problem. So it would run just right away. So to give you an example of what WebAssembly is, I'm going to be showing you a demo about something that runs directly in the browser. And it's maybe you've seen that demo already. It's Windows 2000. And what it is really a VM that emulates x86 running inside of the browser. So this is just my browser just running right away here. So it's the actual Windows running inside of the browser. There's nothing running remotely. It's just a virtual machine environment that pulls down files, basically a hard drive, and runs that hard drive locally inside of the browser. So there's nothing that goes out inside. When the VM runs, it runs completely locally. And the interesting part about that is, it's actually a really good use of Windows 2000. It's about running the Minesweeper there. There's also things like Firefox that can run there. So at some point, people are going to be running more advanced versions of Windows. Probably the Firefox version running in there doesn't run WebAssembly, but at some point it may run WebAssembly. So you're going to be having WebAssembly running in WebAssembly. So that's the kind of things that you can see in how the ecosystem is going to be evolving into. So it's really up to the imagination. So it's very exciting for us to see all those investments. And there are many other types of vendors that have been starting to make things that have been existing for a while running inside of a browser. You get AutoCAD that's running in a browser. There are Unity applications and games have been running inside the browsers as well. And it's moving forward. Nginx also is running inside it's not inside the browser, but Nginx is also running, has been compiled down to WebAssembly and is running through Wasmer. Miguel talked about that a bit before. It's about running outside the browser. You compile something into WebAssembly, make it run, and it uses WASI, the ability to use the system interface. So basically BSD sockets, timers, debugging, anything that goes with the network, you can reuse through WASI. So that means that anything that can be compiled down to WebAssembly will run on those systems untouched. So it's very, very exciting for us. And what that means for us is that now with the Uno platform, we're talking about getting that code that you've been writing or will be writing over to all those platforms. And as a primer of using Uno and what Uno is, if you don't know what it is, Uno is about running a single code base application on native mobile desktop web using C# and XAML. It's been open source since a year and a half using the Apache 2 license. So it's basically something that you can take and reuse in whichever way you want. So it is going to keep being that way for a long time. So we've seen tremendous traction because of the open sourcing. So in terms of structure and architecture about with an Uno application, it's really taking the fact that a UWP application can run on Windows untouched. So you basically build your application on Windows. And Uno is going to be replacing the UWP implementation on iOS, Android, and the web. So what Uno is really, it's about providing that API, the UWP and WinUI APIs, to code that is using those APIs. So basically, you compile, you take your C# and XAML, put it over to iOS and Android, and Uno is going to be emulating or replicating the behavior of what UWP is providing on Windows. So, for instance, if you take a stack panel, which is a way to put elements visually in a stack, on Windows, Uno is not there. Your stack panel is running directly without any change. But if you're going to iOS and Android, then the stack panel is going to be something that inherits directly from a UI view or a view group that comes from Android. So that means that you can mix and match a few things. But the point is, because you have a single code base, then you don't need to relearn all the UI patterns and the APIs that need to go to you need to use to interact with the system. So, for instance, on iOS, if you want to do something that looks like a stack panel, there's something that looks like it, but it's not exactly the same. If you want to center elements inside, it's going to be you're going to have to learn that. On Android, it's going to be different as well. If you want to use the web, it's going to be different as well. You're going to be using any types of CSS to be able to adjust that or center content. It used to be a joke that it was very difficult to center content inside of a page. It's not the case anymore, but it was still there. If you use IE6, maybe you're going to have to do that kind of things. But that's where having the same code base everywhere gives you the ability to reuse all your skills and your team skills. And that's the reason we started Uno in the first place, is because we had a pool of developers that were able to do C# and XAML, and we wanted them to go over to iOS and Android. And relearning all those specifics about all those platforms is not easy, for sure. So another part that's interesting about Uno is the fact that we're also implementing non-UI APIs. So, for instance, we have Martin here in the audience that implemented a few APIs like the gyroscope or barometers where available. So that's the kind of thing that allows you to use the platform-specific APIs, but through the UWP API. So basically, know one API, and then Uno takes care of the rest, and you don't need to know about accessing settings or accessing gyroscopes or geolocation, very specific details about that. Geolocation is one very complex piece of a piece of API, because there's so many different things that can happen with that use. So just learn that single one that comes from UWP, and then you can go. There's also the fact that when developing Uno, we wanted to make sure that you don't need to go you don't need to go to jump through oops to get to what the platform provides as well. So it's not an abstraction that hides everything that's underneath. It gives you access to direct access to what's underneath. And if the implementation of the gyroscope doesn't work for you, well, you can just go build it by yourself and just access the native APIs. And that works as well for controls that are using the UI. So, for instance, if you have a stack panel that needs to be using very specific APIs because you want some accessibility features that comes from iOS that's very specific to that control that you will be showing on your UI, no problem. You can use that one very, very quickly. And it's a guiding principle. You must be able to use that escape hatch of going down to the platform if you need to, and you're not going to be put away because of that. There's also one very important aspect about Uno, is the fact that, and it's been a discussion about cross-platform UIs, is do I want a uniform look or do I want a platform-specific look? And some can do one, some can do the other, and we chose to do both. The basic idea is that because XAML and WPF, when they invented that, they invented styling, they used styling. I don't know if they invented, but the point is that there's notion of lookless controls, and when you create a button, you can put a style on it, and that style can be the XAML style that comes from WinUI or UWP, and it's going to be giving you, let's say, a bunch of rectangles and text blocks and styles and animations that will make your control look like Windows. So that means that if you're putting your application that comes from Windows and make it run on iOS, it will look Windowsy. Maybe it's not the best way to do so. Maybe your designers, because designers are picky, they want that very nice button that comes from Android or iOS. Well, no problem. You can just use that button and just style it differently. And best, you can, it's not very useful, but you can make a converter and data binding on it and just switch between the two at runtime if you want. So that's the kind of things that make it very powerful to have your look if you want to, but also go with the system when that's needed. So that's basically what Uno is, and different set of features that are very important. But the very single best thing about it is just reuse your code and reuse your skills. That's the single most important part of all this. Gain time, basically. So I'm going to be showing you a few things about Uno and a few demos. So the latest application that we've built and published is the Uno calculator. You may see what it is. It's basically the Windows calculator here that's running inside of a browser. So that is the Windows calculator running, and if you look underneath, it's the same. And the reason for it being the same is that because that application has been open sourced by Microsoft sometime this year, they open sourced it, and it's a C++ application. So what we did is say, well, let's take a look at that and transpile that. So we made a translation of that C++ code down to C#. And because it's just the same APIs, even though they're called in C++, no problem. We just took it over and made that application runs. And what happened then is an application that is exactly down to the same application with the same bugs. So we got bug reports saying that the priority of operators in the standard mode is not the right one, because Microsoft, when they implemented that, they said, well, it should be what the cheap calculators do. And what cheap calculators do is not use the proper precedence for operators. So we got that bug report on the Uno calculator port, and we said, that's the same calculator, so we're not going to fix that. It's what it should be. So that application uses all sorts of things like breakpoints for resizing the application. So when it gives you different breakpoints for layouts. It supports, I think it's 60-something languages. It supports localization, supports accessibility. If you have a screen reader, it will work with your screen reader. Not in the web, but it works on iOS and Android. The web is coming soon. So that's the kind of feature that we can get with an application that is built on UWP and make it run on the desktop inside of WebAssembly. So to build this application, we needed to make a few adjustments to Mono. Miguel touched about that a bit before, and the idea is that we transpiled the C++ code of that application that basically makes the behavior of the application from C++ to C#. But there's a part that stayed in C and C++, and that code dates back to, I think it's 1996. Some very old code that's in C, and that code was compiled down to Android, iOS, and to WebAssembly. And we needed to have pinvoke code available to be able to call from C# down to another WebAssembly module. And so that what we were able to achieve to enable the calculator to run inside of the browser. So what this application is, you have Mono running and C# running in there, and you have a piece of very old C++ code that still runs in the browser as well, but untouched. So we're talking very nasty pointery things that you don't want to touch, because if you touch it, it's going to break. So it works there pretty nicely. You can take a look. It's a calculator.platform.uno. So now I'm going to be showing you how you can make something that looks like it. And the best way to develop an application like this is to start by using Visual Studio on Windows. That's how we thought the model should work. It's the easiest to work with because of the tooling from Microsoft. You get a few features that I'm going to be showing you, namely XAML hot reload that comes from UWP, and C# hot reload. So what I'm going to do is basically run that application. It's a simple application that just displays a text block in the middle of at the top of the screen, and I'm going to be just updating my application. And the point of that feature is just start your app and edit it as you go, so that you don't need to restart your application. And that part about making sure you don't restart your applications is the most important, because you don't want to spend too much time just waiting for your computer to do something. So what that edit and continue workflow is basically I'm running my application, and I can do things like this. I'm updating my code, and I haven't saved anything. It's just I updated my XAML. It just updates right away, and I can see the content right away. What I mean by that is you can do things like adding, for instance, let's say I'm replacing that with a navigation view, for instance. That's the very big part of that. Maybe not in stack panel, because it's going to be that's there. So you have a navigation view that happens to be there. So it just shows up. There's the settings that happens there. So I just replaced my root with something else, and it happens to show up. If I go back to my text block, and let's say I just want to change the background because it's not what I want, and just change right away. So that's the workflow that's the most important there. Another thing that's very interesting is, so that's XAML hot reload. But there's another feature that's very interesting as well, and that's C#. It didn't continue, so the name didn't change. So let's say I'm creating a button here, and I'm going to be using a handler that I've written there. So there are some limitations in XAML hot reload, and one is about using code behind. So you can see here that I added a click, and then it says to me that the change is not supporting during a debugging session. So what I can do is just basically stop my application, rerun it again, and when the application builds, and just dock it here, I'm going to be clicking on my button. And so when I'm clicking on my button, I can go to my code behind, and I'm going to be placing a breakpoint here. And I'm hitting my breakpoint when I click the button, but the important thing here is that I can go here and just do button.text, and let's say I'm just putting the time there, and removing my breakpoint, start it again, and then when I press my button now, my code just updates right away. So Uno's not doing anything here. The point is that Visual Studio has that kind of features integrated, and in your workflow, if you're doing that kind of things, let's say imagine in your applications, you're in a form that needs to go 5 or 10 pages down, in your wizard that needs to go very specific things, and your workflow has to go down to that page, but you want to design that page. If your MVVM full, then you're going to be having issues with data binding and things like that, and you want to design with the actual data just showing up. So design time data is interesting, but it's not always what you want, and sometimes it's very difficult to have design time data showing up properly. So the best way is to actually use the application running. So in that context, just basically make your app running, fire up the XAML didn't continue. You can change that piece of UI that you want updated, and then your view model doesn't do what you want it to do, then just go up to the code, put a breakpoint there, hit that breakpoint, change that code, just run it again, and then it will continue working. So that's a workflow that makes it for a very fast developer loop, and it's all about that loop. You don't want to wait on your machine just building and compiling and deploying and all that. And if you've been doing iOS or Android, Xamarin iOS and Android, not because of Xamarin's fault, but sometimes it takes some time to just push the code or build the code to go onto the device. That's lost time that you don't want to lose. So that's a rough idea of the kind of development workflow that you can find for Visual Studio and using that. So there's no Uno there, but now if I want to, let's say I'm done with my application, then I can just go to the second part, which is running my application. So I forgot to mention that. So that application has been created using the Uno templates. So the Uno templates are provided as a Visual Studio extension that you can find in the store. And if you search for Uno, then you're going to see two types of project templates that are provided there. So the first one is a cross-targeted library. You can create a library that targets UWP, iOS, Android, and WebAssembly. And for applications, you can create an application that targets same things. And it automatically creates you a set of projects that looks like this. It's basically an Android application, an iOS application, a share project, a UWP application, and a WebAssembly application. And so many people that are starting with Uno are saying, well, what's that share project that you're putting there? It's just, I'm used to libraries. Why do you do that? And there's a single reason for that. It's build time. The reason for, we could have placed, instead of that share project, we could have placed a cross-targeted library. But the problem is that if you place a cross-targeted library to put all your controls in there, then Visual Studio is going to compile all the targets at once when you're trying to build, let's say for UWP or for Android. So you're debugging your application on Android, and then it's going to be building all the other targets at the same time. That's not useful. So that's a non-feature of Visual Studio in a way. There was actually a bug in Visual Studio for Mac that was working the right way. So when you're building a WebAssembly application, it just builds a single target for a cross-targeted library. And so they're fixing that. I hope the Visual Studio for Mac is going to be keeping that behavior. But that's the reason why we have a shared project here. So what I'm going to be doing now is basically take my application with the button and make that application run directly in the browser. So right now, I'm starting the application without the debugger. And the reason for that is, for now, for WebAssembly, we don't have integration with the debugger inside of Visual Studio, but there's support for the debugger inside of the browser. So we can enable the debugging in the browser for that. So now the application's been built. A small website has been created. Visual Studio is hosting the website inside of an ASP.NET Core server. And it shows you the application running locally. So that application is running inside of an IIS Express that is running here. So you can see all the content. It's like any kind of .NET application that you can run, ASP.NET Core application that you can run on your machine. It's going to be run the same way. And when I click on my button, I do have the same behavior. So the point here is that you go basically create your application for. And the promise of Uno is about creating your application up to 95%. You're making all your view models, your interaction with the network, your interactions with the file system, with your controls and UI and all that. And once you're done, the promise of Uno is your application is going to run the same on iOS, Android, and WebAssembly. And the 5% that stays is about the platform specificities, and there's always going to be platform specificities. Like for instance, if your designers asked for platform-specific buttons, then you're going to have to run your application on the device to see what it looks like and maybe style those buttons. So that 5% is still going to be there. Maybe it's going to go down at some point, but the rest of your development workflow is going to be about running that 95% on Windows or on macOS for that matter, if it happens to be on WebAssembly. But for Windows, it's about running inside of UWP and getting your application running there very, very quickly. So going back to some slides, the promise is to use Visual Studio ecosystem and making sure that we reuse as much or leverage every single piece of the Microsoft ecosystem. So that means Visual Studio and all the tooling. So for instance, an application that you develop for WebAssembly, you can just right-click, publish the WebAssembly application, and it will use the default tooling from Visual Studio to publish to an Azure web app. So that's the kind of things we're talking about. There's also the fact that you have IntelliSense for Visual Studio that's running there. I mean, it's in the XAML, it's going to be behaving the same way. So just use whatever you know already that comes from Visual Studio. There's anything that goes with data binding, XBind, and having your IntelliSense that's providing you all the access to your code that's underneath. That's what we're talking about. And Azure DevOps, that's another thing. So it's we're making sure that we keep Uno compatible with everything that Azure DevOps is providing. And when we're talking about Azure DevOps here, we're talking about everything that goes with build and release pipelines. We've been using that since the beginning for Uno itself, and making sure that we can publish sites and build Uno itself or applications in the easiest way. And all the applications calculated and included are open source. You can go look up all those scripts for building all those applications, and it will help you build your own CI very quickly. We're talking about building iOS and Android applications and WebAssembly applications inside of that ecosystem. You can use others, but if you want samples from us, that's where we're going at. Another important part of all that, and I mean, if it's nice to have a platform, but if you don't have any other third parties running on it, then you're basically trying to rebuild everything. That's not the nicest. What we're talking about is because Uno is implementing the UWP API, or WinRT, in the early days, and WinUI in the same vein. That means that a set of libraries that have been developed for UWP on Windows can basically be recompiled and run on other platforms. So we're talking MVVM Cross, for instance. MVVM Cross, it's mostly a piece of .NET Standard 2 code base, but there are some parts that interact with the UI, like showing a dialog box, a message box, or something like that, that relies on a content dialog control or a message box API that are provided by the system. And because those have been implemented already for UWP, just recompiling on top of Uno makes it available right away. With no changes. That's the main point. You just take the code, rebuild, and it works. One that's to note is Reactive UI. Reactive UI is a very nice framework that's based off on reactive extensions, and Geoffrey Huntley can vouch for that. It's a very interesting piece of software that allows you to make to use reactive programming to make reactive UIs, and it's MVVM-based pattern development, and they've been very reactive, and we're proud to see that the support for Uno has been integrated into the main line of Reactive UI repo and project. And it's not just us making a fork and adding support for it. No, it's part of the main repo. So that's very nice. Other things that are very interesting is that any kind of .NET Standard code is able to run, and we're talking nothing to be recompiled. So, and specifically for WebAssembly, because WebAssembly is able to run any kind of .NET Standard 2 library. That means that all your libraries like maybe Newtonsoft JSON, that one, it's kind of a piece of software that you need to run to be able to deserialize or serialize JSON, and it just runs right away. You don't need to do anything, just import the NuGet package, it will run. It will run just right away. So nothing to do there. That's the fun part. Other types of work that we've been doing is adding SQLite support for Uno on the web specifically. There's the ability to run just SQLite database that happens to store its content inside of the browser. So it's just a normal database running inside the browser, which is mind-blowing in a way. So it's a very interesting piece of software. There's also Rocky that's been adding CSLA support for Uno. So that's also very interesting to see. He's going to be talking to you about all that in the talk today. And one that's been interesting is benchmark.net. If you don't know about that library, it's something that if you're doing performance regression testing or just testing in general is very important. And it's all about doing, like if you're doing a unit test, but basically for performance testing. And it allows you to run a piece of code and just measure it in every possible way that you can find, and down to very small metrics that sometimes you have to go to look into Wikipedia to understand what that means. And that runs also on WebAssembly, and that's very, very nice to see. So that means that we can just performance test the code that's running there. And in the Uno CI, benchmark.net is running performance testing so that we can track if there's regression or progression there. Something else interesting is PWAs. So and Electron as well. So PWAs are kind of a buzzword lately. If you look at it, it's basically just a manifest and the ability for an application to run in a normal environment, like outside, or that mimics an environment that looks like an app. So it's basically about taking a website and make it run like an app, pretty much. So there's a few things that you can make like offline mode. So it's about taking an application that runs on the web and just enable it to run locally on your machine. And it looks like it runs like a normal application, but it's really a website that's running there. You're going to hear lots of things around PWAs. Uno supports PWAs, so that means you can take an application, add a manifest, and then that means that the browser is going to be providing you with a small pop-ups that says, You can install that application as a native app, look like a native application. But the point is that your application is going to be installable on Linux, Mac OS, or anywhere Chrome runs, basically, or Firefox for that matter. So that's a very important part of making an application that looks like a system application, but by using WebAssembly or any kind of other technology. The other part is Electron. So, Electron is controversial in many cases. People are hitting on it, and Oren Novotny is, fervent, let's say, disliker of Electron for many reasons. But the first one is about memory consumption. Lots of things can be done about Electron, but the point is that you can take a code base that runs inside of Chromium, JavaScript and WebAssembly included, and put it inside of an application that you can deploy with an MSI and that looks like a standard application. It's not a website running really. It's an application that runs inside of Chromium locally on your machine. So there are many examples of that kind of applications, but Uno supports that as well. So that means that you can put your application there and deploy it as a normal application using click once for that matter, if you want to do that. So that's basically what Uno is, and all the supports and the features that we have. So that's what Uno has been for a very long time, and a year and a half if you followed us publicly. But now we're going to be talking about what's next and some announcements. And we've seen since Uno has been released a lot of success in terms of getting people interested in it, and customers talking about it, and contributions, and people getting interest picking up, and that encouraged us to continue developing on it and push that forward and make WebAssembly support go farther. And the rest of the talk is going to be about new features. And so we're proud today to announce the Uno Platform 2.0. So what Uno Platform 2.0 is, it's about adding four significant new features and pieces to Uno. And that's about making sure that WinUI runs everywhere, and it's about aligning everything to that WinUI feature set for all platforms at once. It's also about improving the developer productivity. And there's one thing that people have been asking us for a while, and it's all about, I'm talking about the 95% and the 1% that's missing, the 5% that's missing. And we're proud to announce XAML hot reload for Uno Platform. So I'm going to be jumping right into the details right now and showing you a demo of what that is. So I'm going to be starting up again with an application that runs the default template. So basically, file new project. And I'm going to be testing that into WebAssembly. It's all about all platforms, but for the demo here, it's easier because the deployment time is faster. So what I'm going to do is just start my application as I normally would. And it's pretty similar to what the hot reload for other platforms or their other scenarios that look the same have been running already running. So my application is starting up, and I'm just going to be putting that on the side. And now what I can do is just go to that and type a little bit into my application. And when I save up, it just updates right away. So big difference here. It's not like it's a work in progress in preview, but the big difference here is that you have to save the file first. So we're going to improve on that later on. But the idea is that when you save, it's just going to update inside the browser. So it's the same experience if you go to iOS and Android. It's going to update your page right away. So if I change the background here and put something else, it's just going to updates right away. So another interesting part when you're doing hot reload and you're doing an MVVM application is all about bindings. So let's say I'm adding a slider. So my slider is going to appear here, and then let's say I'm adding a text block with some text there, and I'm just going to be doing a binding on the position of the slider. So the property of the slider that gives me the current value is, the current position is value, and just updating that and saving. Now you can see that I have, oh, that's not very visible. I do have a new 0 that happened here, and I can change that content right away. And that means that you don't need to restart your app and just, take all your time, especially on Android and iOS, to rebuild everything. And when we're talking about that last detail, it's all about, let's say that slider is on iOS, and I want to style that slider that's very specific for iOS, then I need to run on an actual device. So that's where it gets interesting. Another thing that we can do is, let's say I want to see the actual element name itself. That's going to be the toString of the slider itself. So that's the kind of thing I can take a look at. Or let's say take a look at the maximum value, of that element. That's a property that tells me that's the maximum value for the slider. So it's going to give me 0 to 100. So that's the kind of thing that we can do. There's also something interesting. Let's say same thing as I did before. Let's say I'm changing the navigation view, putting navigation view instead. Then there, I have my navigation view just showing up. I can even do that kind of things. Let's say in my navigation view, I'm adding, let's say, navigation view. It's menu items. I'm adding a navigation view item with some content. Item 1. It reloads and gives me my one item that I can select. So let's say I'm adding another one, then I can switch between the two. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the things that you can do with hot reload. So you can go pretty far with that. There's another feature that I'm not going to show right away, but the idea is that you can partially reload. So when I'm starting this, it's basically when hitting save, it's just pushing over the new XAML and just replacing the whole content of the page. But if you have a user control, you can swap just the user control itself. So if there's some state that's not data bound, then if it reloads the page completely, then you lose that state. But if you reload just part of the content, then it's gonna update properly. If you just forgot about that one, let's say I want to test the height of some content. Let's say my item is I want to test the height of the item. I can see that my item here is just gone bigger. So that's the kind of thing that you can test. And if you want to tweak every single details, that's the thing that you can do. Templating is also supported. You can change the templates. We're not supporting resource dictionary yet outside, so that's the kind of thing that we're working on. And David here can explain to you all that when you're going to see him at the booth. But that's the scenario that we're looking at. So that's nice. That's a sample application with just a text block. So you can say, well, that's nice, but it's not a big application. So let's take another example. We've published an application that's called WADO. WADO means for Universal Azure DevOps Organizer. It's an open source application that's meant to be a reference application for us to show what Uno is as an actual useful application. Aside from the calculator itself, that one's interesting as well, but it's another application that's simpler because the calculator is quite complex, even though it's a calculator, which seems odd, but that's a very heavy application. So WADO is open source, and you can go poke at the code and look at for yourself. And what I'm going to be doing is take that application and making sure that I'm taking the position of an integrator and taking my own code as a non-integrator and say that the code that I've developed is not nice. So let's say that application does not look nice. I mean, logging that's not English. So let's change that. So that red on not nice. So I'm going to remove that. So the border brush shouldn't be here. So let's remove that. So Oh, there's a, let's see. Oh, it just it updated. So there's one important thing, and that touches what Miguel explained a bit earlier. So the code that's running inside of the application is using the interpreter for performance reasons, but build performance reasons, not runtime performance reasons. So that means that when I do Control S, the XAML is pushed to the running application, reloaded, and because it's running with the interpreter, it can take some time to parse that code. So that's why you see a bit of delay here. And I'm assuming at some point when we're going to be having faster performance using a profile-guided AOT and things like that, that experience is going to go much faster. So logging still not good. Let's change that here. Put login instead. And that logo is not right. So let's change that. Right? Oh, there's a scale transform that doesn't make sense. So let's put that scale transform in the right way. Oh, there, that's better. That's a lot better. So I have a day in my app, and a developer at Inventive just noticed something that if you put the scale in the right way, it gives you open. So it's not on purpose, really, but it's very interesting. And so it's to tell you that it's all open source. You can go look. Oh, there you go. It's, you can go look that up and look at the code for that application running inside of the browser, and you can use the edit and continue. So big improvement in Boost, and some people have been using it at Inventive, and they're seeing that their productivity improve because of that feature. So that's it for hot reload. What's upcoming is improvements. So what you see here is a very early preview of the feature. It's basically not the proof of concept because it goes farther than that, but we need to be adding some features to make that feature a lot more user-friendly. So now if you want to see when you're doing a typo inside of a XAML and it doesn't load up, you need to go look into the devices log to see what is happening. So that's not nice. The idea is we want to have VS integration using the language services. So basically, it's the squigglies that you can have inside of a file to tell you that it's not using the right syntax. We want to be able to give you some details, like if the device is not able to connect properly. That's the kind of thing that we want to provide. Connection between the browser and Visual Studio is using WebSockets. If you've been wondering, and the reason for that is that it's basically the only way to get out properly without all the cores and all the security features of a browser. But it works pretty well. So that means that you can also reuse that if you're doing an application. There's no cores limitation when you get out of a browser using WebSockets. So if you having an application that needs to run or communicate with a cross-site application, that's the way to go. And there's also resource and templates edition, so that's something that we're working on. It's a legacy feature that we implemented on a legacy behavior that is in Uno that we need to adjust so that it's providing a lot of newer features, and it's going to be enhancing the behavior of the hot reload feature. So continuing on the idea of going farther into reaching new developers that may be interested into WebAssembly and Uno. And we recognize that there are lots of developers that are using Xamarin Forms today. They're targeting their mobile devices, and we want to make sure that they can target the web, and because people have been asking for that, and the only answer they have right now is go to basically implementing your application another time and go to React or to Angular or anything like that. And if you don't want to redevelop or learn those new skills because they're so different, because you're not accustomed to it, then well, if you're Xamarin Forms, you're basically stuck. So we've been asked a few times. That's interesting. You're doing that at Uno, but I have a Xamarin Forms application. So what can I do? Well, now we have an answer for that crowd, and it's the WebAssembly renders for Xamarin Forms. So it's a way for people that have been developing their applications to use the Uno feature set through their Xamarin Forms applications, but using what is called a renderer. A renderer in Xamarin Forms is basically a way for a control that is defined in a cross-platform way, let's say a button, for instance, to be rendered into what the platform provides. So when I was talking about having an application that uses the native platform style, or that uses a cross-platform or a cross-platform design that looks pixel perfect, well, that's the one that uses the native renderers. So the interesting part is, because Uno implements the UWP contract, that means that the UWP renderers that Xamarin Forms already provides, well, if we put Uno under the UWP implementation of the renderers that Xamarin Forms provide, then that means that we can take a Xamarin Forms application and put it inside of a browser. And that may not, the graph is complicated because it's basically a cake of layered features and platform support that are layered on top. But the basic idea is that we reuse that source code from UWP and ported it over to Uno and make it run your application. And what's very, very nice about that is that you can basically take your Xamarin Forms application and with one line of one command line, add support for WebAssembly, and just go with it. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. Just how do I do that? So this is an application that has been created using the mobile projects from Xamarin Forms. So basically, you create an application, check the UWP platform support. I'm not going to be clicking the create button because it's going to close my solution. But basically, you add support for UWP. You use the master detail feature that is provided by the wizard, and then you end up with a for project application. So the core of the application is that one, and it's using Xamarin Forms XAML. No things touched there. You're going to be having your iOS and Android and UWP heads. And what I'm going to be doing is basically open a command line, and then I'm going to be using the .NET New command line. So if I type .NET New, it gives me a few templates that are available on the system. And what I can find is one that says Uno platform WebAssembly head for Xamarin Forms. And basically, you type wasm xf head as the new. So if I just do that, it's going to be modifying, and you can see that my solution has changed. And when I go back to my solution, I'm going to see that when it reloads, there's a new project that has been added to the top. So that's a structural change that we are going to see with the people that are working with the .NET New templating system. But basically, you have your new head that's been created for you. Nothing to add. Just basically run your application with a Control F5. It's just going to be building your application. And that application is just a sample. It has a list, data binding, a control that looks like a split view or a navigation view, and it allows you to test the features that come from Xamarin. So as you can see, I haven't touched anything. It's just a basic sample with an added project on top next to the others. And once it's done, so it takes a bit of time. It's because of the linker. So it's a feature that allows the build to remove code that's not used. So in other demos, I disabled it to make the demos go faster. But in there, because it's creating a new project, it has to be there. And there it is. There is your application. So it's basically the sample application. You can click on that. You can go into an item, see the data binding, the Xamarin data binding running there. And you can see that if you go into the About, you're going to see the About. So it tells you that it's iOS, Android, and Windows, but WebAssembly now. So and you could go learn about Xamarin Forms a bit more if you click on that button. So special note on that specific feature, Frank Kruger, the excellent Frank Kruger, has been developing OWI. It's basically same thing, set of renderers that provide access for WebAssembly. The very big difference is that because Uno is implementing already lots of controls that are available for a UWP, that means that, for instance, that control that you can see here, which is a UWP split view, to implement that, it's a lot of work, and it's done already by Uno. So that's basically, it gives you a lot of controls that are out of the box provided by Uno, nothing to implement more. So that's the big difference with Uno. And Frank has been the base of the work for WebAssembly. He discovered a few things, especially with the bootstrapper that Uno uses. So, and he told us that at some point he may reuse that for OWI back. So that's very interesting. So that's the demo. And oh, I'm going to be showing you so something that's very interesting. It's an application that the Xamarin Forms team has been providing as a sample that comes from their site. It's a reverse polish notation calculator. That same thing as just took the .NET New, creates the template, and there you go. It gives you a calculator that does very simple things. Nothing's changed, just .NET New that. It gives you a new application. And another one that's very interesting is the application that the Xamarin Forms team uses to test their own features when they're developing it. And that application is ugly, but that's not the point. It's about testing features, and that application is run using UI unit test, UI tests, and basically it's about clicking on the application in an automated way and test features like that. So it's basically about testing all the focus and transparent is enabled, things like that. So you can change the state of a button like this. So that's an application that the Xamarin Forms team uses for its own implementation. And because renderers work as is, we could take that application and test the implementation of Uno and Uno controls and the renderers that they provide in the same way. So that's the good part. So that's to give you an example of that. So let's go for the rest. It's what's upcoming with the support for WebAssembly for the WebAssembly renderers for Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms 4.3. We're on 4.1 yet, so there's a few things that we need to merge. Not a big deal, but it's timing constraints. So 4.3 is not out yet. It will be in a few days, or I don't know if it's a few days, but soon, I guess. And there's also the shell support. If you've been doing Xamarin Forms, there's been a lot of debate around the support for shell for UWP. And Morten Nielsen has been working on that and has an open PR to add support for it that uses the navigation view that comes from UWP. We tried to make it work, and it's almost working. So there's lots of things that need to be adjusted to make sure that everything's fine there, but it's still a PR. So we were to be making modifications on top of a PR that's still in PR on top of another PR. So that makes a lot of unstable code to test. So it's getting there. So if bear with us there, it's soon. So continuing in terms of adding support for all features and adding making sure that you can reuse most of your code, I'm going to be talking about Skia Extended. Skia Sharp has been supported by Uno for a while, and we've been using the what is called the dynamic linking feature, and it allows for accessing features that are provided by the Skia engine. Skia is it's a very fast rendering engine that is used by Chrome itself to draw itself, to give you an idea of the kind of features that it needs to be doing, and so it needs to be very fast. And here's an example of what Skia is able to do. So that is an application that runs completely under Uno. It's using the mixed mode support for WebAssembly. So it's basically parts interpreted, parts AOT. It's not using the profile guided, so it's the fine grain that we can have is basically some assemblies are AOT'd, some are not completely. So that makes an application that can be quite big. And when profile guided AOT goes down to the method, it's going to be very interesting. But that's where we're going at. And that application is basically statically linking the whole Skia engine built for WebAssembly inside of the application. So what I can do is basically load up an image that's a PNG. I can do shaders, to rotate, repeat, blurring an image, masking, chain filters, and to show you that it's not a bitmap or something that I'm showing you here. Let's resize. Okay. So it's not a bitmap. So it's actually computed right away. And you can see I'm on the laptop, so it's not the fastest. It's fast, but not that. And it's pretty smooth. And it's using pixel rendering. So we're talking about software rendering in a way. Skia is able to do OpenGL. So it's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking into. And that's the kind of thing that you can do. Lots of things, shaders, image, draw matrix, shapes, gradients, filters like that. So lots of things that you can do. Rendering text, path, dotted lines. That's the kind of thing that can be complex. So the reason we added this is that there's lots of code that's been developed using Skia Sharp that is able to do some custom rendering. We have customers that need that. They've developed that for UWP or for iOS and Android, and being able to use that same code of Skia Sharp and C Sharp and port that over to the web without touching anything, and it renders the exact same way. It's something that's very powerful. And what we've added is the people at Microsoft have been developing an application, a library that's called Skia Extended, that adds a set of additional features that provide a set of advanced capability in terms of drawing shapes and drawing things like that. So basically, if I want to render a star, I just basically do draw a star, and that star is going to be drawn at that point. So you don't have to do anything to do that. So it just sits on top of Skia Sharp. It's the same code that you will find on any other platform, Xamarin Forms included, and it runs just right away. Another interesting part is, and that's for people that are doing animations, is interpolations between shapes. So I can just change a shape and morph into multiple types of shapes. That's the kind of thing that Skia Sharp Extended is able to do. There are the parts that we're going to be adding support for as well, but that's the basic things that you can get with that. There's also an SVG parser, so you can take an SVG file, give it to Skia Sharp Extended, and it's going to be drawing you that content. So that's about Skia Sharp and its content. So what we'll be adding, so we're going to be working on that one pretty extensively because it's been asked so much. For various kinds of reasons, I'm going to be touching in the third part of that talk. But WebAssembly for OpenGL, OpenGL support for WebAssembly Skia. So what you've seen here in terms of demo is basically rendering by the pixel. So what Skia is doing is basically drawing pixels one by one, and we're taking that rendering and putting it into a canvas, an HTML canvas. That's not the fastest. I mean, video cards are way faster than that. So Skia has that implementation, and we're going to be adding that to the Skia Sharp implementation. There's also the fact that Skia Sharp itself is moving fast. The implementation that we've made is basically a custom version of what Matthew Leibowitz has been doing to add support for WebAssembly. We're going to be merging that, and it's been making lots of updates there, especially with regards to memory management and image decoding. So we're going to be adding support for that as well when we merge that code in to the support for Skia Sharp on WebAssembly. In terms of support for iOS and Android, nothing new to change. I mean, there's just a control that's specific for Windows, which is called a SK Canva XAML canvas. It's it allows you to just take a canvas and draw into it and just make it cross-plat. So there's a sample on the Uno gallery that there's samples in the Uno GitHub that gives you that kind of thing. So it's basically some drawing a yellow background with some text that is cross-platform. So that's about it for Skia. And now there's one thing that I can announce as well. It's about productivity and QA and making sure that you don't regress when you're improving your code. And that's cross-platform UI testing with Uno UI Test. That has been very important for us, and for a lot of reasons. But specifically for developing Uno, we want to make sure that when we're developing a feature and developing a control, then that control doesn't regress or it behaves properly. And when we're updating between versions of different versions of that control, that we're not regressing anything. And there's something that already exists for iOS and Android. It's Xamarin UI Test and gives you access to testing your applications, but it's very mobile-oriented. So that means that there are features that you cannot access, like if you're on the desktop, it doesn't work that well, and it doesn't work for WebAssembly, obviously. So what we did is basically use the API set of Xamarin UI Test and put Selenium under it, which Selenium is a framework that allows to do automated interaction with the browser, specifically Chromium. So it's using the WebDriver protocol to communicate with the browser. And that gives you something that looks like this. So here I have an application that basically has a Visual Studio's behaving. So I have an application that basically has a checkbox and a text box with some content. And if I run that application, I'm going to be just showing that up. It's a very simple application that gives you just that. So I can just type it into. So very, very, very simple test. So what I'm going to be doing is taking that test. So that test is going to be click on the checkbox, asserting that the initial state of the checkbox the checked state is going to be false. And I'll be tapping on that checkbox. Then I'm going to be asserting something else. And so if I run that test, let's see what's happening. So it's building my UI test. It's based on Unit 3. So it's standard UI testing. If you've been doing some Xamarin UI testing, you're going to see exactly the same thing. So if I loaded up my application, so it loaded up automatically, and you can see that if you're running your application, it's telling you that Chrome's been controlled by another application, so to do your automated UI testing. And when I started my application previously, it was not checked. Now it is. But the problem is that my test didn't finish, and it failed. I got the red cross here, and there's one good reason for it. Let's take a look at that. So my test failed because I expected false, and it was true. So let's go look at that. So what happens is that I had a bug in my test. I tapped on the checkbox, and I went to look at the isCheck property, and when I click on the checkbox, it becomes true. So it's actually not false. It should be true. So let's change that. I'm running my test again. So it's been rebuilding the test. And then when I run the test again, now this time, checking the box, typing something in the text box, and then my test goes up green. So that's what you can see. And the very important part of all this is for us as Uno to make sure that we're not regressing. And when we're adding something inside of Uno, we're adding new UI tests. And we've been doing that for the past 2 months or so. So that makes for a very important part. And we had a lot of UI tests that have been developed for Uno for iOS and Android that were using Xamarin UI Test. And what we were able to do is take those tests, import them into Uno UI Test, and basically just with a few renaming of namespaces, reuse all those tests and basically improve overnight, in a way, our UI testing for WebAssembly, because we could reuse all those tests without changing anything. So that we have, I think now we had 200 tests or something. That improves quite a bit. And one of the design goals of that testing is to be able to test during PRs. And we're now testing UI testing Uno in every PR, and we're running all the UI tests or every pull request that comes into Uno. And the nicest thing is that you've seen when I'm starting the test, the browser just starts in a few seconds. We're not talking about minutes or hours in some cases for a test that can be run on devices. So now what we're doing is basically developing our UI tests inside of WebAssembly. And then because it's cross-platform, then it goes over to iOS and Android. So we mostly never had to change anything. It just works on the other platforms. So that's the kind of things that we're looking at. It's improved our development flow very nicely, especially because if you discover a bug inside of your tests, and then you're doing a feature, you commit something inside of your main repo, and then your testers are finding that bug, and then it takes a week for that bug to come back to the developer, probably not the same one, and then you spend a lot of time and cycles of all the people that have been discovering the bug and triaging that bug. So making sure that if that you're testing inside of your PRs is a very important part, and Uno UI testing is all about that. It works also in PRs for iOS and Android, because Xamarin UI Test fixed recently now enables that as well. So go UI testing. So up next for that is more desktop-aware features, and also things like Windows support. We're going to be adding UWP support for that because we provide an abstraction for UI testing. So adding another platform is mostly no-brainer. Who knows, maybe we'd add macOS or anything like that when that happens at some point. So that's it for the UI testing. So that was mostly the Uno-specific announcements. Now I'm going to be talking about something that's very important for an ecosystem. And we're proud to announce that Syncfusion is adding support for Uno platform with their suite of controls. That's pretty amazing. I mean, in a line of business app, you need a charts and a data grid. If you don't have that, maybe it's not a line of business app. So that's what Syncfusion is going to be adding in for Uno, and they're going to be adding support for data grid, charts, and calendar starting today. They're an industry leader for that kind of controls, and they're getting the Uno vision, and that's very important for us. That means that a big player like this investing into the Uno ecosystem is key, and it's a great signal for us that open sourcing Uno was a good choice. So they're present here at their booth. You can go ask questions about their support for Uno. I'm going to be showing you a small demo about their supported controls. So it's about testing those controls on iOS, Android, and WebAssembly. I'm going to be showing you a demo about WebAssembly. So they have a sample application that shows quite a few things, but I'm going to be showing you two. Still a work in progress. We're improving and been working with them for about 2 months now. And we're making a lot of progress to make sure that everything works as it should be. So this is the demo for WebAssembly. Works as well on iOS and Android. So this is a set of controls that show you a line chart. Simple one, it's the kind of thing that you all need when you're developing a line of business application, and same thing for column charts. So it's not a pixel. It's not something that's been drawn, so you can actually resize the content. So that's to give you an idea of the kind of controls that will be provided by Syncfusion starting today. So that's it for Syncfusion. Let's see for the rest. And so now I'm going to be announcing something that we're proud of as well, and it's the Windows Community Toolkit support and the XAML Llama that has made it made us a pleasure to come here and to show us everything that goes with the Community Toolkit. Thanks, Michael.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Hawker. I'm also known as the XAML Llama on Twitter, so you can follow me there, and I tweet about a whole bunch of UWP and XAML-based stuff. So I'm always interested in finding out about the great stuff that Uno's doing, so really informative stuff from Jerome, and really a pleasure to be here and talk and share with you a little bit about the Windows Community Toolkit and what I do at Microsoft there on it as the community lead. And so if you're not familiar with it, the Windows Community Toolkit is a suite of controls, extensions, and helpers for Windows development. And so it's primarily developed for UWP at first, but through the magic of Uno and the great work that Jerome and his team has done, there's a lot of components that still work with Uno, and we're also looking at WPF and WinForms helpers with the whole .NET Standard movement as well. So we have just a lot of great .NET components that can help you build your applications on Windows. It's part of the .NET Foundation. Everything is open sourced on GitHub and MIT licensed, so we are always looking for community members to come and contribute, and a lot of our controls have come from the community, and so we just like to work with everyone and see what we can build together and help kind of fill those gaps and in the platform that that people need to solve things. So we've been out for about 3 years now. We've had over 25 releases. We're just about to come up on our next one soon, and we've closed over 1,337 issues. We've had 2.5 million NuGet package downloads. We just hit that last week, so we're really proud of that. And we're getting close to 10,000 commits by over 200 contributors. So we've had a lot of progress over the last 3 years, and we're excited to be here talking at UnoConf and sharing with you a little bit about what we're looking at in the future. But if you haven't used the toolkit through the magic of Uno, you can actually do that in your web browser. So there's a link here to their WebAssembly version of part of the sample app, so you can see what works from the toolkit in WebAssembly. We also have a sample app in the Windows Store, which you can use to actually play with the XAML live within the app and try things out and some of the controls, as well as view the documentation, and it all works offline as well if you're on the go. So as I mentioned, we have a release coming up. It's going to be in October. It's going to be our 6.0 release. So we have some cool new controls we're working on. One is the tokenizing text box, which if you've used Outlook or selecting contacts or tags in DevOps, it's that sort of control which can group an item into a box and let the user remove items that they don't want. And that's actually going to have Uno support as well. And that's PR will hopefully get merged in soon, still doing some testing, but we're excited about that contribution as well. We have an eyedropper control that's coming from one of our community members. We have a whole bunch of other improvements to some of our panels and other controls and helpers and extensions for Win32 space. And some of the other big collaborations we're doing, we work closely with the WinUI team a lot, and so they work on Lottie as well, and so they have some improvements, including linear and radial gradient support, which will be coming in our next release in October. And then we're also improving the tooling for XAML islands. So if you haven't heard of XAML islands, it's what lets you take your UWP controls and runs them on WPF and WinForms and Win32 applications, especially with .NET Core 3 coming up next week with .NET Conf. We're improving the tooling there. So now we're investigating a lot in the toolkit to look and see, okay, how can we make all these UWP controls work with XAML islands as well. And so with Uno on top of that, everything that as we've been kind of looking to the future, it's going to be great to see all these different technologies come together in the future with where .NET is headed. But there's more. That's not all there is to my announcement and why I'm here today. And so I'm happy to announce that we have controls for the Microsoft Graph that we're previewing today. And so these will allow you to easily connect to user data that's in the Microsoft Graph and build rich application experiences. So we're starting off this preview with a login button, person view, and a people picker. And they're not only going to be working with UWP, but they are going to work through XAML islands to get you to WPF and WinForms and Win32, and of course, since I'm here, with Uno on Android and iOS. Thanks. So let me jump into a quick demo here and show these off. So it's pretty easy to get started. If you haven't used the Microsoft Graph, you just basically need to register a client ID in the Azure portal. And so I just referenced that here with this little helper to set up the provider that all the controls use. And once you have that set up, you can basically just include these graph controls and they'll automatically connect you to the Microsoft Graph. So once your user authenticates and logs in and gives your app permission to access their data, you can start using that data within your application to create these rich connected experiences. So I actually have this running in the Android emulator with Uno. And so I can see I have the login button here, which just gives the user an easy way to sign in and authenticate. And then I have a person that I'm going to show once I've signed in. So I'm going to click here. It's going to go and automatically use the Microsoft Authentication Library and connect to my user account. So you can see it's already recognized that I've signed on this device before. So I can just click, I'm Megan today. It's my test demo account. And so that's automatically going to show that I'm signed in now, and then fill in this person view control, which can show myself or anyone else that any of other contacts I have in here as well. And if I click on my login control, it'll give me the option to sign out. And if I jump over here, I've got the preview of the UWP version of this, so it's running the same controls. And so I've got the login control, and this is the people picker control I mentioned as well, so that'll be coming to Uno very shortly, hopefully within the next few days, but we're working on it. And what this lets me do is just actually search for other people and contacts in the graph. So I can just drop this control in and start searching for my contacts within the graph, my other coworkers, add them. They'll automatically get to be in these tokens, so I can remove people if I don't want. I can use data binding to get access to this data very easily. So it's a great control to just get easily started with the graph. But also, this whole tokenizing experience is just a great base control. So if you're doing tagging or any other sort of data entry in a form in your application, you'll be able to use that on its own as well as part of the Windows Community Toolkit in our next release. And that's something that, because the people picker is working on Uno, that base control will work on Uno as well. And so the great news is that the preview of these controls is available today, live on GitHub. So just follow aka.ms/WGT. That'll get you to our main repo with the UWP controls that show all three that I just demoed for you today. And there's also links to the Uno version of that. The login button and the person view are working on that repo in the sample as well. And we'll be working shortly to get the people picker up there, as well as looking at iOS support, getting that finalized. That should be coming as we move forward with our release. But please hop on our GitHub, give the controls a try. Please file issues or feel free to open up a PR. And we look forward to seeing what you can do with them. And more controls will be coming as we move forward with our releases. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand it off to the next speaker.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I have Llama treats too, thanks to Matt Lacey. So stay for his talk because he's always awesome.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Beautiful. So let's talk about what's coming next, right? Obviously, there's been, who's excited about 2.0 announcements?
Yay! Amazing.
So the road ahead. First and foremost, like people are asking, where are we putting our focus and dollar signs and efforts and like countless hours? It's going to be community first, right? Obviously, the primary reason why we've open sourced Uno last year was to get all of you involved, for you to share your insights, your thoughts, and really drive where we're going next. I think we have a great foundation. Like the team has been doing tremendous work so far, but there's a lot more that needs to be done, and we get requests every day. There's a way for you to get your voice heard and just vote on those issues on GitHub. Geoffrey is there like pretty much 24/7. looking at these, so let's make sure he doesn't feel alone. So community has multiple aspects, right? Obviously, getting you engaged, we've talked about like how we care about all types of validations and contributions, but also getting partners involved. Like we have Syncfusion here today. We have Sam from Telerik speaking this afternoon, so hopefully you'll be able to convince him to get on board as well. So on the vendor side, but also making sure that everything that you've been using as third-party open source components, that they're working nicely and seamlessly with Uno as well, right? So that's going to be our primary and core focus. I wouldn't hide the fact that we're really excited by an announcement that Microsoft made at Build, where they announced that the next version of WinUI, WinUI 3.0, will be open sourced. So obviously for us, if you think of as to how we've been building technology, it's going to be extremely useful, right? If you look at it for the past 6 years, it's pretty much been witchcraft from the team because they were looking at UWP as a black box set of behaviors and contracts and trying to guess and figure out how it was working so they could mimic this on iOS, Android, and now WebAssembly. Now we're going to have the opportunity to look at it in details and make sure that we get like 100% alignment in terms of fidelity and how and accessibility to the contracts as to what's expected from a WinUI app so that we can carry over those same behaviors and actually reuse, to some extent, some of the code that they've built as is, the same way we've been doing for Calculator. There's opportunities for us to just take that code and have it run on iOS, Android, and WebAssembly. So that's extremely exciting. So looking forward, like you can expect as soon as they open source it, that we're going to get busy and looking at as to how it's been built, like maybe refactoring some of the aspects of Uno as it stands today, but really move forward and leapfrog everything else we've been doing by aligning with WinUI 3.0, right? So there's challenges. They've already mentioned like how it's going to be challenging based on what they've built so far and what's coming with WinUI, but we'll be there on day one to offer as much day zero support as we can. And maybe, Jerome, with regards to like WebAssembly and backends more specifically and the other requests that we've had?
Yes, so WebAssembly, there's lots of movement there. It's improving by the day, whether it's being from Mono itself, from Microsoft as a larger ecosystem, or coming from the Emscripten, it's the library that's been used by Mono to make sure that everything runs on WebAssembly, or by the WebAssembly community itself. A few things that have been added recently is threading support, Emscripten, and the Mono team has been hard at work to add that. We're also trying to get that to run. There's a few things that are that need to be fixed in Emscripten or under the dependencies underneath, but that is going to be added very soon. So that means that we're going to be able to unleash the potential of reactive extensions. That's going to be very amazing. We're excited to be able to test and give it a run. That's going to be pretty amazing. Other thing is the provide guided IoT. I mentioned that. For now, when you're building an application, the end result can be pretty big, especially if you take the calculator, for instance. The end binary is about 35 megabytes. And the reason for that is that there's lots of code that's built to WebAssembly, and that might not be needed. And the reason for that is the linker is not efficient enough. Miguel touched about that with weak points that will enable more of the linker to work and lower down the side of the side of WebAssembly module. But it's all good things to look at. Last thing is about additional backends. We have some refactoring to do to be able to enable that, but we've been doing some poking at macOS, Linux, and Skia. macOS, there's a preview somehow that's already available inside of the Uno code base. It's not fully featured. There's a few things that gave us the attention of Miguel specifically. That was a nice one. Skia, we have a proof of concept as well. We're going to be looking at that, but it's basically about enabling the community to add support for more. If you want to be able to run it on Linux for GTK or something like that, that's something that you can do, that you will be able to do once we enable that to add some more backends. So very interesting things to look at for the road ahead.
Yeah, and obviously those strategies, speaking of backend specifically, they're all in flux strategies, right? So if you look at WebAssembly, we're strong believers that this is not only an emerging technology now, but a leading technology tomorrow. And like if you take a step back and look at WebAssembly, you can already run and target like Mac OS operating systems, Linux operating systems, and pretty much run everywhere. So obviously there's a story where we could get native experiences the same way we've built for iOS and Android. We could get native Mac OS and Skia backends the same way we've done it as proof of concept. So if you're looking for challenge, you're welcome to contribute, and we'll get you hooked up and set up. But obviously, the focus on WebAssembly, everything we've been building, it's been historically first on iOS and Android because that's where we had an opportunity to grow technology first. But now that WebAssembly is there, not only will we be at parity, but we're strong believers that obviously more efforts are required to make sure we're aligned with what Microsoft is doing for Mono and WebAssembly and how quickly paced it is right now. So we want to make sure we keep up. But there's opportunities there to even like invest more heavily, right? If you're looking at all those enterprise apps that still need to run and get out of desktop app native experience through the browser, there's tremendous potential there. So we'll be actively and aggressively working on the WebAssembly and really providing a unique UI framework for you to run in the browser. Just going back and really as your key takeaways, right? Like I got that you're really excited by 2.0. If you were wondering if we were committed to the universal cross-platform, getting your stuff working everywhere, I think today shows that not only now, and yes, our story has been like build on Windows first, and the promise of Uno is it's gonna work everywhere. But for finally tweaking those 5 and 10% scenarios on a per platform experience and going deep into those platform specifics, like now, like I'm still amazed that it's been working, but like getting hot reload working on all platforms is extremely exciting, I believe. Who's excited by hot reload?
Yeah.
And like we're trying to be obviously open source and industry players and like bring Xamarin Forms for the ride and bring them to the browser. I think is also going to be extremely exciting. I saw it on Twitter. I was following for the last couple of minutes. Where I think we're getting tremendous traction there as well. UI testing, right? Good development practices. Being able to on every single PR to bring your UI tests to all platforms, I believe is also tremendously amazing. And all the support that we're getting from partners, from Syncfusion, from Michael and the team on Windows Community Toolkit side is extremely exciting. So we have one last announcement, and no, it's not a Max Pro version of Uno. It's really to welcome you next year again at our next UnoConf.